In the pre-internet days, being a self-managed independent musician was extremely difficult and nearly impossible. However, the birth of the internet and later social media opened a new path for artists, giving them tools to pave their own way in the industry. While industry giant labels might still be able to provide value, they have lost the power to gatekeep the industry, and because of that, we've seen a surge of self-managed independent artists in the last 15 years or so. Today we'll be focusing on the journey of a specific trio who have achieved major success by forging their own path in the industry all by themselves. This is the story of Black Tiger Sex Machine. Black Tiger Sex Machine, abbreviated as BTSM, is a multi-genre bass music act hailing from Montreal. The trio consists of three longtime friends, Julian, Mark, and Patrick. Now, before we get into the story of how BTSM was formed, let's dive into the background of each member to get a better understanding of who they are individually. Growing up, Patrick was the most musically inclined of the three. He started playing the violin at 6 years old, and he continued on to play the violin for the rest of his adolescence.
My mom wanted me to learn an instrument, and I kind of randomly picked violin.
All three members are big fans of movies, with Patrick's favorites being 2001 Space Odyssey, Citizen Kane, and Gladiator. He also became interested in electronic music pretty early on, with OG groups like the Chemical Brothers and Prodigy. In one of BTSM's Reddit AMAs, Patrick said that he had Prodigy's album called Fat of the Land on repeat when he was 11 years old. He also enjoyed rock like Rage Against the Machine and Slipknot, and then he got into 90s hip-hop and started producing his own hip-hop beats, though he never released anything. Out of the three members of BTSM, he was the only one who was producing before BTSM was formed, as the other two members got their start in DJing, which I'll get into in a bit. Patrick is the main producer in BTSM, though all three members work on the tracks to some extent. Okay, now let's move on to the next member, Mark. Mark and Patrick have known each other since kindergarten, but they didn't become good friends until a little bit later.
Mark and I have known each other since kindergarten, actually. Yeah. We weren't friends initially, but we were enemies at one point. But
oh my god.
Yeah, then end of grade school and high school, we became really close friends, and we live in the same neighborhood, so we would always hang out together with a few other guys that we're all still friends with.
Mark didn't come from a musical family, so he didn't become heavily invested in music until later on. He was more into video games and sports, and he was on his school's varsity basketball team.
And I was only about sports and video game until I quit varsity basketball because I was at the end of the bench, never getting a minute.
As I mentioned before, all three of the members are big movie fans, and Mark's favorites are Lord of the Rings, Shawshank Redemption, and Fifth Element. Mark is the one who's in charge of all of the aspects of their live shows, including finding obscure tracks to play out. Alright, now let's move on to the third member, Julian. Mark and Patrick first met Julian when they were all 12, but they became closer once they were in high school. Julian took the most influence from movies growing up, more so than the other two members, which makes sense because he is the main visual director for the group.
When I was much younger, I played piano a little bit, learn how to read music and stuff like that. But I was more into movies, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. I started acting a little bit and started getting acting coaches in Montreal.
What age was this around?
I started getting really interested about it around 15 years old. Mm-hmm. I'm a big movie buff, so I started realizing that at first I was like, okay, maybe I want to be in front of the camera, and now I'm starting to think I do some of our music videos, and I'm really involved in the process of everything that's visual, so I'm thinking I want to be more behind the camera a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Well, not on social media because people that follow us, they know I'm a lot in front of the camera, but I just love everything about, filming and being filmed. I think it's a very unique way of expressing yourself. So I'd say I was more doing that.
What were your favorite movies back then?
Oh wow, I don't think, they're really obscure movies, but I'm a huge fan of Alejandro Jodorowsky. Mm-hmm. So he made movies like El Topo, La Montaña Sacra. It's very strange movies, but the photography is amazing, and he's a genius. I also love a lot of sci-fi stuff like Blade Runner. For me, is a great inspiration, and I think people that follow us, they know that it has a connection with everything we do. Mm-hmm.
Julian even worked at a movie rental store for a while, similar to Blockbuster, but in his own words, it was more refined. Aside from his role as the visual director for BTSM, he's also in charge of the overall branding and making sure that the mixing and mastering of each track is up to par. After graduating from high school in the mid-2000s, all three members went off to college. Patrick studied finance, Mark studied economics, and Julian wanted to study film, but his dad made him pursue a law degree instead. He figured that he would just go through with it to make his dad happy, and then he could figure out what he actually wanted to do after he was done with school. Julian and Patrick both attended college in Quebec, but Mark went to college a few hours away in Ontario. While they were in college, all three of them became heavily interested in electronic music, as electro house was popping off around that time and Montreal's scene was beginning to flourish. They became fans of artists like the Bloody Beetroots, Justice, and Boys Noise. This was also around the time that the blog era was starting, so they would dig through blogs to find new music. Mark took it one step further when he began DJing at parties as well as his local college bars. Around that same time, Patrick and Julian went to a Justice concert together, which left a big impression on both of them.
I went to this Justice show with Pat, and I saw like the crust light up like at the beginning of the show. I'm like, what is this? I knew, I was like, this is what I'm doing with my life.
On Boxing Day in 2007, Mark got an M Audio brand MIDI controller, and all three of the guys started messing around with it, which got Julian and Patrick interested in DJing as well. Patrick would go visit Mark whenever he got the chance, and Mark started to teach him how to DJ, and eventually, the two of them began DJing parties together. They would mostly just play mainstream music, but they would also throw in remixes and mashups of stuff they liked, but it wasn't very well received. However, that would start to change as people started to be more receptive to the more dance-oriented tracks once 4-on-the-floor beats made their way to the radio through artists like the Black Eyed Peas and David Guetta. Around that same time, Patrick started to DJ with Julian as well, playing small parties and events around Montreal. Eventually, they all finished undergrad, and Mark then got a master's degree in international business before moving back to Montreal. Once all three members were reunited in Montreal, they decided that it was time to form a trio, which was the birth of Black Tiger Sex Machine. On a quick side note, I found this video saying that the idea for BTSM came about while they were living in Barcelona, and I couldn't find literally anything anywhere else on the internet that talks about them living in Barcelona, so I'm unsure about the details of that. In the video, Apache, who I talk a little bit about in the Ganja White Night video, said that he lived with BTSM in Barcelona.
We both moved to Barcelona together, to have an apartment together.
We decided actually 7 years ago here on Plaza Real in Barcelona to start an electronic music band. And it felt like the right move for us to come back in Montreal and to start doing music.
Like I said, this information is completely isolated, so if anybody has any additional information regarding their time in Barcelona, let me know in the comments. But anyways, apparently they got the idea to form BTSM while in Barcelona, but it appears that they were back in Montreal soon after. Now, as to how they came up with their name, there are two different variations of the story that they've told in interviews, though I suppose they could also be two parts of the same story. Here's the most frequently told story.
The name came out of nowhere. It's like kind of a weird story. It's just like there's the R-rated version and the PG-13 version, but it's just like this girl that was texting me, and I'm not super proud of the story, but I was trying to get her to stop texting me for real. And the guy next to me, like I was finishing bar school, which is like the after law school when before you do your internship and articling. And the guy next to me is like, yo, dude, just text her whatever random words you want and she'll stop texting you. So I started texting her Black Tiger Sex Machine. And I don't know why, we were playing soccer that night, Pat, Mark, and myself, and I'm like, dudes, like this name, for some reason, it sounds good, Black Tiger Sex Machine, but believe it or not, there was actually zero plan of having helmets, zero plan of branding or whatever. It was just like a name that we were looking for a name for so long, and we're like, this stands out, it feels good. It might feel a little funny at the beginning for some people, but after a while, like saying it over and over, like Black Tiger Sex Machine, it sounds cool, you never forget it. And then there was, we didn't even think of like doing BTSM, that came afterwards, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of Yeah, there's luck around these little moments, I feel.
However, they once told a different story when they did an interview with EDM World magazine. They said that the Sex Machine part comes from James Brown, referring to his 1969 album called Sex Machine, which was fitting as BTSM used a lot of funk samples in their early work. They said that the Black Tiger part came from the movie Apocalypse Now. I'm unsure how the black part of Black Tiger plays into that, but anyways, that is what they said. That version of how they came up with the name seems much more thought out than the texting story, so maybe that's the meaning that they assigned to the name after coming up with it, or maybe that's just what was actually going on through Julian's brain when he was texting the girl. But regardless, the texting story is the much more commonly told version. Black Tiger's Sex Machine was just something that they were doing for fun at the time, as they all had full-time jobs after graduating from college. Julian was working as an attorney, Patrick had a few different jobs in those early days, and Mark worked for a few different startups. However, they had dreams of turning BTSM into their full-time job, and they were very organized and strategic about making that happen, with each individual member tackling different components of the project. Though, as with most artist projects, the early beginnings of BTSM were fun, but also not very glamorous.
We would play in bars for, 10 people on Wednesday nights for like basically no money.
In one of their Reddit AMAs, they recalled these times by saying, "We had our first residency at this place called Le Social in Montreal, and there would be maybe 5 people in the place sometimes, but we had fun and built from there, slowly growing through the years until around 2013 when we got invited to play some shows in Europe." Looking back, we've definitely come a long way, but it seems for us that things just slowly crept about with a lot of ups and downs. Aside from that residency at Le Social, they also played on Thursday nights at Reggie's Bar in Montreal, featuring drinks and shots for just $1, and they also played at the Velvet Speakeasy occasionally, as well as some other venues.
It was a bit odd in the beginning with our relatives. Like, yeah, we started a music group called Black Tiger Sex Machine. We DJ'd these really cool, aka not so cool bars in Montreal at the beginning.
Somewhere around this time, they began learning how to produce, which was brand new to Julian and Mark, but like I said earlier, Patrick had a little bit of experience from making hip-hop beats. They started releasing music in 2009, but most of it has been wiped from the internet. Though I was able to track down a few things. Here's a music video for a song they released in 2010 called Girls of Winter, which made it on the Hype Machine Top 100 chart. I also found this disco electro mix they put out in 2009, and it sounds dramatically different from the BTSM we know today. Over time, they were able to network with other local DJs, which helped them land more gigs, allowing them to spread their name within the local scene. As time went on, they were able to play to larger crowds, going from playing to 10 people to 100, until they got their first big break when given the opportunity to play to 600 people.
Our first kind of major thing in Montreal was this venue called Belmont. The owner and the manager, Alessandro and Brooke, they came to see us and they're like, "Oh, we would like to do like some kind of weekly or monthly event with you guys. We see what you've been doing. We think, you could do something really cool in a bigger space. So let's work on a concept and launch it in a couple months. But by the way, we have an open night next Friday. Can you guys put together a party in a week?" And we're like, whoa, we don't know if we can do it. We during events, our biggest ones are like 100 and something people, and you want us to fill this big venue. So we just kind of put together a concept of like, Julian was like, oh, let's do like some kind of costume or theme or whatever. And we thought of like cannibals. I don't know why. And then Mark found like the poster of this movie called the Cannibalinn Holocaust or something online, and we kind of took the poster of the movie, adapted it, and like, okay, we're doing a cannibal themed party in a week called Cannibalinn.
These parties occurred before the creation of the tiger masks that they wear today, but they were still a fan of dressing up even back then. They would have different themes for the events, with the trio dressing up to fit each occasion, including dressing up like zombie doctors and clowns. Once these events picked up momentum, they started to bring in talented artists who would go on to do much bigger things later on. For example, Julian from Major Lazer used to play at Canniballen parties before Major Lazer was ever a thing. Some other now well-known artists who played at these parties include Apache, Kai Wachi, Dabin, as well as many others, including Doozjackers, which was a duo that Snails was a part of before he ever started the Snails project. Also, since I just mentioned Dabin, it's worth pointing out that BTSM actually manages Dabin and has been for a very long time. So not only are they proficient in operating their own brand without a manager, but they're also capable of managing other artists while balancing that with their own career. Anyways, many of these Canniballen artists were more advanced producers than BTSM at the time, so they were able to learn a lot about producing from the relationships that were formed through these events. After several editions of the Canniballen events, they got the idea to turn the brand into a record label in 2011, creating the opportunity to connect fans of the Canniballen events to BTSM's music releases. Many of the previously mentioned artists who played at the Canniballen events would go on to release on the label due to the relationship that they had formed with the BTSM members. This was extremely beneficial for BTSM as they were able to source up-and-coming talent to help grow their record label and the BTSM brand, while simultaneously benefiting the career of the other artists. To kick off the beginnings of their record label, they released a track called the Canniballen Anthem, which also featured 2 remixes of the track, one from the previously mentioned Doozjackers and the other from Elo and Heights. Before we dive deeper into the beginnings of Canniballen Records, let's take a quick break to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Basehead Beads. I personally have been raving for 9 years now, and as a seasoned vet, I know how important candy can be to fellow ravers, and Basehead Beads is here to take your candy game to the next level. Basehead Beads have been popping up around festivals more and more in recent years, so I was super excited when Basehead Beads reached out to me to sponsor this video. As a company entirely owned and run by ravers, they understand that candy isn't just about the beads, it's about the memories and connections that they create. They know how special candy trading can be and the difference the perfect candy can make. That's why they offer a diverse range of over 300 unique bead designs that cater to every passion. Here's a quick look at what you can find on their website. Let's click Shop by Festival and let's go with Lost Lands. Here we can look through a wide selection of designs that come in different sizes, including mini, jumbo, and regular. I'm gonna go with Kevin the Alien because who doesn't love Kevin? Let's do the glow-in-the-dark option in a 30-pack. If you enter the code AudioEats in the discount code box, you'll get 15% off your order and you'll be supporting the channel as well. I've included a link in the description so you can check out all the designs that I won't have time to show you, but I just want to take a second to show you how creative some of these original designs are. Some of my personal favorites are the Sprout clips, record player, and the cool little Walkman players. Basehead Beads kindly sent me a package with hundreds of beads in varying sizes, so I started crafting some candy of my own as soon as it came in. I was pretty impressed with how detailed the beads are, especially the mini ones since they're so small. They're definitely higher quality than anything else I've seen, and I really mean that. They're all 3D printed in-house, and every bead has a nice glossy finish. Here, I'll show you some of the bracelets that I made using Basehead beads. There's this rubber duck one with cute little ducks using all 3 sizes, a nice little breakfast bracelet with avocado toast and coffee, a dinosaur bracelet which is perfect for Lost Lands, a glow-in-the-dark bracelet which was actually impressively bright when I tested it out, and my personal favorite, a bracelet with speakers that look like a mini version of Mackie Thump monitors, complete with green and glow-in-the-dark aliens, and the Basehead Beads logo as a nice finishing touch. Basehead Beads are the perfect addition to your next show or festival, and they're sure to bring a smile to the faces of your fellow ravers. Check out my link in the description, or use code AudioEats at checkout to get 15% off your next order of these high-quality beads. Running a record label was a totally new experience to BTSM, so they had to figure out everything on their own. However, they were already gaining valuable skills from running their Canniballen events, and this helped translate into success running their record label. Like I said earlier, each member brought their own unique skill set to the table, allowing them to work efficiently as a team. Just like they had divided responsibilities on the art side of things, each member was also responsible for overseeing different parts of the business side of things, which is still how they operate to this day. Julian is in charge of social media, branding, merchandise, and content strategy. Mark does general label operations, licensing, and PR, and Patrick does the accounting since he has a background in finance. Having a team of 3 members with unique skill sets gives them a significant advantage, and it's largely why they've been able to operate without a manager still to this day. Their efficient workflow put them in position for big opportunities early on, such as opening for Avicii in the summer of 2011, as well as getting a ton of coverage from various blogs. For the first few years of the project, specifically from 2009 through 2011, they were still trying to figure out how to present their brand. However, one night in 2011, things were set in motion that would birth the core identity of the brand moving forward. Julian was at a party when he met a young guy from France named Gabriel Hebert, who was an industrial design student about to graduate from college. Julian explained to Gabrielle that he was interested in turning Black Tiger Sex Machine into a masked trio in order to connect the BTSM and Cannibalinn brands through imagery.
Yeah, I mean, we've always loved groups or bands or whatever that have like a strong visual identity.
He asked Gabrielle if he could create masks for them, and Gabrielle agreed to take on the project. Not much later, the first generation of Black Tiger Sex Machine masks were born. The first gen helmets are much more simple than what they use now, as they just had a static outline of white lights around the eyes with a simple on and off switch, and each mask required 8 AA batteries. The members have previously mentioned that they get incredibly hot wearing the masks, but it's worth it for the experience that it gives the fans.
There's no fans in there, so it really gets...
It's pretty cold tonight, so it should be okay, but
tonight's gonna be okay.
If you're playing 1 hour at like 40 degrees Celsius, like in the summer.
Gabriel went on to create the newer generations of their masks as well, and he also works on BTSM merch to this day.
And meet Gab, he's the one who made the tiger helmets.
Hi guys.
He's the beast. He's also in charge of the merch in the office, like all the beautiful merch you guys buy.
At the end of 2011, BTSM released the Drama EP alongside a music video for the lead track, which ends in a clip of the trio putting on their new helmets. It's a very cinematic shot, signaling the beginning of a new era for the trio. A little over a month later, they debuted the helmets live at Igloo Fest in their hometown of Montreal.
And we decided to unveil the helmets at Igloo Fest in Montreal, which is an outdoor festival under the snow. And we were playing right before Diplo in front of like 9,000 people.
The crowd absolutely loved the new look, so they immediately knew that they had tapped into something special. However, they didn't wear the helmets for every show moving forward, as it was more of a special occasion thing early on, but eventually they did start to wear them for every gig. In April of 2012, they released one of their earliest singles that is still publicly available, a collab with Dabin called Dark Speakers. Just 10 days later, they released the Rhythm Mode EP, which was their first release featuring their new Tiger helmets on the artwork. The EP hit number 49 on the Beatport Electro House charts and received plenty of blog coverage, just like many of their previous tracks. In July of that year, they got to play Bass Mentality in Toronto alongside Dabin. For those that don't know, Bass Mentality was a weekly event that Zed's Dead and the Kilobits threw in Toronto, which shared a lot of similarities to BTSM's Cannibalinn events. And if you want to learn more about Bass Mentality, be sure to check out my Zed's Dead video. So 1 month after BTSM played at Bass Mentality, Gabrielle finished their Gen 2 helmets, which featured significant upgrades from the previous generation.
The second one, we added some Wi-Fi and color, and the color LEDs, sorry, and the ability to control the lights. But there was like some default with the way it was designed. It was still cool, but it was not as slim and tight as the current design.
They debuted these new helmets at one of their Cannibalinn parties that August, which was the first time that the helmets were ever worn for one of their Cannibalinn sets. 2 weeks after that, they celebrated the 2-year anniversary of their Canniballen parties, and they also announced their new EP was almost finished. The EP, which was named Studs, Spikes, and Blood, was released on October 16th, complete with a music video for the track Resurrecta. Also, just as a side note, I want to give them credit for how professional these music videos were from the start. The detail that's put into every shot is extremely impressive, and every video really showcases Julian's filmmaking skills. And while we're talking about the professional quality of their videos, that same year they also made a promo video that was filmed inside a church, which was the birth of the church aspect of their brand.
We were opening for Sebastian Ingrosso. We were like in the green room. We asked if we could be in the green room. That's how, we were just starting. And I went up to him and I'm like, look, we have this promo video that we made. We filmed it inside a church. And that was like, I directed that with Karel Schladeg that does all of our photos and videos now, and we were making a lot of projects together, and I just like he looks at me, literally he's like super cold look, and he's like, why inside a church? And I'm like, well, it's this idea of community. People, to me, electronic music is this kind of collective of people going to like the midnight mass, it's a ceremony. And he's like, that's a great answer. So, and then the idea stuck with me. I'm like, so what we have is a church, this post-apocalyptic church, and the BTSM church thing just kind of came naturally. So
in an early interview, they spoke about the church and religion aspect of their brand, saying that they don't intend for it to be religion in a formal sense. Rather, it means that music is a universal religion that creates bonds and strengthens existing ones. By January of 2013, they had created a new live show, and they showcased this new direction for their performances through the church promo video that I previously mentioned. They decided it was time to finally ditch DJing for something that was more involved, which was the early beginnings of the way they perform live to this day. In the video, you can see that Patrick is playing the keys, Julian is playing MIDI drums, and Mark is DJing and controlling the samples. At this point, even though it was still very early in their career, they had every element of the project nailed down, from their sound and visuals to their live shows and community interaction. They had their eyes set on becoming an internationally touring act, and they had the professionalism and work ethic to back it up. However, at this point, they were still basically just a local Montreal act, but they had everything in place to take things to the next level, and things were about to start accelerating. They got to open for Skrillex in Montreal at the beginning of 2013, and Porter Robinson visited their studio 1 month later. That's not really relevant, but this old picture of Porter was just too good to not put in the video, so I had to throw it in. Anyways, later that month, they announced that they would be playing a show in Italy, which was their first time playing a show in Europe, so they were well on their way to becoming a true international act. Later on in June, they debuted their first ever live show in Montreal after teasing it in their video showcase earlier in the year. The following month, they announced a 6-week European tour which took place at the end of the year. After the tour was over, they capped off the year with a zombie-themed Cannibalinn Christmas event. And as far as music releases for the year, some notable ones include the Jack That Body EP with Dabin, the Destroy It EP, which features a Kai Wachi collab, and a bunch of singles including Stairway, which samples League of Legends, and a collab with Snails called Shockwave, which features the classic Snails vomit step sound in an electro house format. They also released a single called Moonlight, complete with a music video featuring themes from the movie Clockwork Orange. 2013 was undeniably a year of massive growth for the trio, with the introduction of their new live show and their first ever international tour. They started off the year with under 10,000 fans on Facebook and ended it with well over 30,000, so their reach was quickly snowballing. To kick off 2014, they announced that they would be returning to Europe that summer with a completely revamped live show known as Church 2.0. In the months leading up to the tour, they had a string of single releases. A collab with Hazer called More, a collab with Kai Wachi called The Craving, a collab with Dead Battery called Rapid Fire, and a single called On the Run, complete with a music video that features POV shots of a BTSM show from behind one of their masks. That summer, they embarked on their previously announced European tour, playing in Italy, France, Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and the Czech Republic. After they finished up the tour, they released a track called Ocarina, paying homage to The Legend of Zelda, one of their favorite video games. The cover art features a modified version of Zelda fan art by David Palumbo, who granted BTSM the rights to use it commercially. After the release of Ocarina, it was followed up by the Afterworld EP.
Every time we release music, we try to do to tell a little story. So we've got this Afterworld EP coming out. The title track Afterworld is kind of inspired by those zombie walks and those Mad Max movie.
After the EP release, they put out 2 more singles, the first of which is Revolt, as well as a collab with Apache called The Grave. Now, by this point in their career, they had done an incredible job of growing the BTSM and Cannibalinn brands all by themselves. They have always utilized social media to the fullest, as it was the most powerful marketing tool that they had. At this point, they had over 50,000 fans on Facebook, had become extremely well known in their hometown of Montreal, and they were even able to book their own European tours twice, as well as a tour in South Africa. And they were able to accomplish all of that without having a manager or booking agent. However, in October of 2014, things were about to accelerate even more as they signed with their first ever booking agent, Jake Schneider, who had represented some major artists. To be clear, they did remain self-managed after this point, and they are still self-managed to this day, but having a booking agent would open them up to more show and festival opportunities, allowing them to grow even faster. In an old interview, they said that signing with Jake was a huge breaking point for BTSM due to all of these opportunities that it brought in. They have also mentioned before that finding an agent was one of the most difficult things for them because they wanted to play in America, but since they were Canadian, there were more hoops to jump through. So by the time that they finally signed with Jake, they had already proven to the world what they were capable of, but by the end of 2014, they were just getting started.
Merry Christmas, Cannibal!
At the beginning of 2015, they released the Funeral March EP, followed by their first ever US shows thanks to their new booking agent. In previous years, they had focused heavily on playing in their hometown of Montreal as well as Europe, but this year was about to be all about growing their reach in the United States. Their very first show in the United States took place at Webster Hall in New York City, followed by shows in Eugene, Oregon, and Seattle. They then released a new promo video showing off their new live setup, similar to the promo video that they shot in a church a few years back. The video was posted on the Thump YouTube channel, and it quickly racked up over 100,000 views in just a couple of weeks. Moving forward, they then continued on with another run of US shows, playing in San Diego and Orange County, and then they spent some time in Los Angeles, where they got to meet Skrillex for the first time at the Jack U launch party. They then went on to play in Denver for the first time at the Church nightclub, which is literally an old church that has been turned into a nightclub, so it couldn't be more fitting for their brand. After that, they played at the Swan Dive and 219 West in Austin for South by Southwest, which is basically a showcase for up-and-coming artists. The show at 219 West was thrown by Jesse Breda, who I previously did an interview with, and it featured a stacked lineup of artists who would later blow up, including Illenium, Opio, and Closey. After that, they went to Miami for Miami Music Week, where they got to do some networking as well as some relaxing. In early April, they played their first ever US festival, Euphoria Music Festival in Austin, and then they released a new single called Numbers. They also released a music video for it, which is intended to be reminiscent of the opening scene in Blade that takes place in a vampire club. The video has a lot of people in it, so they needed a bunch of extras, so they actually had a bunch of their fans from Montreal come out to be in the video. Throughout the rest of the year, they were all over festival lineups in the US. They played the Hangout Fest Thursday night kickoff in Alabama, then they went on to play Summer Camp, Wakarusa, 515 Alive, Electric Zoo, Riverside Festival, Lollapalooza, Dance Festopia, Tomorrow World, as well as a return to their hometown for Il Sonic, plus a massive set at Electric Forest.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was the first kind of major festival we played in the States, so it's really got a special place in our heart.
That summer, they also played 2 shows in Alaska, and then they dropped their collab with Lectrique called Religion, which quickly became their most popular track at the time, and it's still one of their more popular tracks to this day. Excision put that track in one of his Shambhala mixes, which gave them a ton of exposure, as a lot of fans discovered them through that track. Throughout the rest of the year, they played shows all over the US, including a show in Austin where Illenium was actually their opener, which is pretty wild to think about. They also played a handful of shows throughout Canada, as well as a return to Europe for the third time. They released 2 more tracks in the latter half of the year, a collab with Dabin called Break, and a track called Scorpion. 2015 was their busiest and most successful year yet, taking over the US market by storm. However, aside from their rigorous touring schedule, they were also working hard on their debut album Behind the Scenes, which was set to be released early in the following year. In mid-December, they had another Kannibalen Records party in Montreal, celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the label. As far as I'm aware, this was either the last Kannibalen Records party or one of the final ones, as their schedule had gotten so busy that they didn't have time for these events like they did in their early years. They closed out the year with a New Year's Eve set at Decadence, Colorado, and kicked off the new year with a set at Lights All Night in Dallas the following day, January 1st, 2016. 1 month later into 2016, they made a return to Igloo Fest in Montreal, the same festival where they debuted their Tiger helmets for the first time ever in 2012. Roughly 1 week later, at the beginning of February, they released their debut album called Welcome to Our Church. It featured 12 tracks, including collabs with longtime Cannibalinn members like Kaiwachi, Apache, Lectric, Dabin, and more. They branched outside of their typical electro house style on a few of the tracks, which hinted at things to come, as their style has been incredibly adaptive over the years. After the release of the album, they went on a blistering 49-date North American tour, wrapping it up by the end of April with a little bit of a break before festival season, where they would debut the 3rd generation of their helmets. These are their most complex helmets yet and feature a MIDI mapping for the lights around the eyes, which is controlled by them live on stage, adding an extra layer of integration into the BTSM visual experience. A few months later in August, they released the Welcome to Our Church remix album, which featured remixes from some now major artists like Sullivan King and Eliminate, just to name a few. They also released 2 singles that year, the first of which is called Mountains, which features a recording of the crowd at one of their shows chanting, and the other single is called Face Down. That fall, they set out on another tour, making stops around the US, Canada, and Australia, as well as some festival appearances such as Nocturnal Wonderland, Voodoo Festival, and Imagine Festival, which is actually where I saw them for the first time and I didn't know who they were. To start off 2017, they set out on the Music Is Our Religion tour with 27 shows between January and March. The tour featured a completely revamped visual show, this time integrating the LED visuals with their new helmets. So basically what that means is that they were now able to control both their visuals and their helmet lights live on stage. They had actually debuted the new visual experience for their hometown fans in Montreal 2 months before the tour started, but the rest of the world didn't get to see it until early 2017. This was also the first tour where they brought all of their own production as well as a larger team. On the 3rd week of the tour, they released their first single of the year called Hell Motel, with the artwork being inspired by Blade Runner. That summer, they went on to have their most stacked festival season yet, playing for the first time at Shambhala and Paradiso, as well as their second time at Electric Forest, plus a handful of other festivals in Canada and France. They also got to play EDC Las Vegas for the first time, which was a very big moment for them, as Patrick had mentioned in an interview the year before that playing EDC was a dream of theirs. During that year, whenever they weren't playing shows or festivals, they were working on their second album, so they dropped a ton of unreleased tracks in their festival sets that summer, but the album wouldn't be released until the following year. However, they did release a VIP remix of their 2012 track called Resurrecta that appeared on their 2012 EP Stud Spikes and Blood. At the beginning of September, they teased an upcoming collab they made with Kid, who was blowing up around that time, but it was never released and never talked about ever again.
Go.
About a week later, they set out on the road for their second tour of the year, the Midnight Terror Tour, with 6 shows in Canada and a whopping 22 in the US. In the midst of the tour, they had to make a quick stop at Legend Valley to play a set at the first ever Lost Lands. This was a huge deal for them as they were all big fans of Excision for a very long time, and they had been very vocal about that in the past. Just a few days before that set at Lost Lands, they released their final track of the year, a collab with Yuki called Lions, which was the first single from their upcoming album. After wrapping up their Midnight Terror tour towards the end of the year, they closed out 2017 with a bang by playing at Decadence, Arizona. In January of 2018, they announced that their sophomore album was finally finished and it was set to be released 2 months later in March. 1 week after the announcement, they released the second single off of the album, Zombie, featuring Panther. A week after that, they announced that they would be giving away one official BTSM Tiger helmet to promote the new album.
Who wants to win a BTSM helmet?
A point system was created where fans could earn points through completing various tasks like subscribing to their YouTube channel, following them on SoundCloud, pre-saving the new album on Spotify, etc. Fans got even more points if they pre-ordered the album on iTunes or bought tickets to their upcoming tour. However, whoever had the most points wasn't automatically the winner because the contest was a raffle, so the more points you had just meant more entries into the raffle, giving you a better chance to win. Not only would the winner receive the helmet, but they would also be put on the guest list to any festival of their choice that BTSM was playing that year, plus $500 for your plane ticket and transportation expenses, plus a meet and greet with the trio at the festival where the members would sign the helmet and then give it to you. The winner was Michael Hernandez from El Paso, Texas, so shout out to you, Michael, if you're watching this right now. On February 15th, the third single from the new album was released, a collab with Sullivan King called Madness. 2 weeks later, on March 1st, the album called New Worlds was finally released. The very next day, they set out on the Ceremony tour, which wrapped up in mid-April. Then, they made a return to EDC Las Vegas, followed by Spring Awakening, a return to Shambhala and Lost Lands, their third year at Imagine, and many other festival appearances. They also went to China for the first time that summer, playing 8 shows in just 8 days. Once the fall rolled around, they released a single called Snakes, which was another collab with Yuki, and then they set out on the Ceremony 2.0 tour, which closed out in Greenville, South Carolina on Halloween. In the final month of the year, they played a few more festivals, including Creamfield Shanghai, a festival in Myanmar which I don't know the name of, and they finished the year off at Decadence in Salt Lake City. To start 2019, they played a handful of shows in January, and in February, they released their new 2-track EP called Download the Future, which just so happens to contain my all-time favorite BTSM track called Hacker, which is a collab with Blank. So if you're ever in the mood to hear some nasty mid-tempo, you should definitely check it out. The other track on the EP, which is obviously called Download the Future, is also mid-tempo, and I think it's possible that Rez gave them the inspiration to experiment with that style. They have consistently praised her on social media in years past, and they have made it clear that they are big fans of her, so it's just a thought that I've had. After the release of that EP, they had a couple months off, which was probably a much needed break because they had been touring at a ridiculous pace for the previous 4 years. Once April came around, they got to open for Excision at 2 different shows, one in San Francisco and the other in Vancouver. After that, they returned to EDC Las Vegas for the 3rd time, where they debuted their new live show, and then they played World DJ Festival in Seoul, Korea, and then a return to Electric Forest for the 3rd time, as well as Global Dance, Osheaga, Nocturnal Wonderland, and another year at Shambhala, plus Lost Lands once again. At Nocturnal Wonderland that year, they gave away a BTSM bomber jacket where fans had to beat all 3 members consecutively in rock, paper, scissors in order to win. They made a return to Australia and New Zealand that summer, playing a total of 5 shows, followed by shows in Beijing and Shanghai. Right around that time, they released a new single with Micah Martin and Tomorrow called Everything. Their next release was yet another collab with Yuki called Spiders, and their final release of the year was called Let's Get It. Towards the end of the year, they announced their Futuristic Thriller tour that would take place in 2020, where they would be showcasing new music from their upcoming Futuristic Thriller EP. The name of the tour and EP, Futuristic Thriller, is a callback to an ongoing mix series that they started in 2012 known as their Futuristic Thriller Mixes. They used these mixes to show off their love for various movies, with each mix starting with a sample from whatever movie was chosen as the theme of that specific mix. Some of the movies that were featured in the mixes throughout the years include Star Wars, Clockwork Orange, V for Vendetta, and many others, as there are a total of 20 mixes. Montreal got treated with an early Futuristic Thriller show on December 20th, almost a whole month before the rest of the tour started. In early January the following year, before the rest of the tour started, they announced that they would be giving away another Tiger helmet, which was only the second time ever that they gave one away. The rest of the tour kicked off in Winnipeg on January 16th, and they were scheduled to play a total of 48 shows for the tour, making it one of the biggest they had ever done, and they had been planning it for a full year. It was their most visually intensive show to date, fresh with new cyberpunk visuals, including live-action cyberpunk scenes that they had shot themselves, which isn't something that you see very often in electronic music, if at all. Aside from just being visually stunning, the entire show had a storyline to it that follows the main protagonist, Naomi. Naomi is trapped in the year 2058, where a mad scientist named Cannibalinn is creating AI zombies. Naomi is a connected fighter, meaning she can control a giant BTSM robot to fight the zombies and Cannibalinn. Near the end of the movie experience, she's losing the battle, leaving fans on a cliffhanger that would be continued in future shows. 2 weeks into the tour, they announced the winner of the helmet giveaway, with Barbara Mondragon being the lucky winner and the second ever person to own an official BTSM Tiger helmet. The tour then continued on through March, but unfortunately it was cut short, with the later dates being rescheduled due to COVID. They still released the Futuristic Thriller EP that summer, which was their biggest EP ever, with a total of 8 tracks, including a collab with Blank, as well as a collab with AT Aliens. To make up for the sudden lack of shows, they decided to live stream their Futuristic Thriller show on YouTube, complete with visuals. Later on in November, they released their 20th Futuristic Thriller mix, which is the last one that they ever released. In January of 2021, they released the first single of the year, a collab with Keizo and Point North called Lifeline. They dropped another single in April with JT Roach called Creature, and then later that month, they announced that they would be selling 3 official BTSM helmets, with the funds being used to help build their new live show. One of them was literally auctioned off on eBay, and the second was an NFT sale, with the buyer also receiving the physical helmet, obviously, and the third was a part of a raffle that you had to purchase tickets to enter. Around that time, things were starting to look up, and live events would soon return. After over a year with no shows, BTSM had a huge announcement letting their fans know that they would be headlining Red Rocks for the first time in October. The show would feature the BTSM movie experience from the Futuristic Thriller tour for the very last time. However, they had a few things planned before the Red Rocks show, and they finally had their first show back in over a year when they played at Forbidden Kingdom, and then from there, things started to pick up, playing a drive-in show in Ontario, then Bass Canyon, Electric Zoo, and Faded. Then, it was finally time for their sold-out debut at Red Rocks. About a week after the show, BTSM took to social media to let fans know that Mark was going through some tough times and would need to step away from performing live. The post says, "Hey church fam, an important update for you guys. Mark has been going through some difficult family events recently, and he unfortunately wasn't able to travel with us for the Los Angeles and Portland shows tonight and tomorrow. Mark himself is fine, but he needs to stay in Montreal and do what's best for his family. Please respect his privacy. Send positive vibes his way." That being said, Patrick and I will still be playing both shows. With the help of Mark and our team, we rebuilt our live show to perform as a duo. It will be weird to perform without Mark, aka our bear, for the first time, but all 3 of us agreed that it is the best thing to do in the present situation. Expect the same immersive BTSM experience packed with new music and visuals. See you at church. To close out the year, they played at Lights All Night in Dallas, and leading up to the show, they took to social media to open up more about what was going on with Mark. His dad passed away, and some other members in his family were dealing with health issues, which had taken a toll on him, and he wanted to be closer to his family. At first, it appeared that Mark stepping away from touring might just be temporary, but after a few months, they announced that only Julian and Patrick would be touring moving forward. The post they made reads, "Hey Church Fam, important life update. We know that most of you have been noticing two tigers on stage at recent shows. As most of you know by now, Mark's father sadly passed away late last year. Mark has decided to step away from the touring life so he can be there for his family. Touring is a huge sacrifice for any artist. It comes with the unbelievable joy that fans can bring you while you're up there on stage, but also with the sacrifice of not being with your family for months at a time. Pat and myself obviously both fully support Mark's decision. The only thing we can do right now is be there for him. It's not because you don't see Mark on stage that he isn't part of the creation process. On the contrary, you have to understand that hundreds of hours go into building the show with the team before we perform it on stage. Mark is not leaving BTSM, he's just stepping away from the touring life. Don't worry, we spent a lot of time figuring out how to make sure you all get the same immersive BTSM experience with the two of us up there. With our latest album out and with the new tour live show ready to go, we're just getting started with the story and the vision. See you all very soon on the road. Send some love to Mark." On January 28th of 2022, BTSM released their third album, Once Upon a Time in Cyberworld. It features 12 tracks, including collabs with Kai Wachi, Yuki, Wad, Heritage, and ATLiens, and it racked up 3.5 million plays in just one day. In an interview with EDM Maniac, they said that the album's theme is supposed to be a crossover between cyberpunk and a spaghetti western, two movie genres that they like. Julian mentions that he's a big fan of Sergio Leone and his movie Once Upon a Time in the West, so the album title is a direct reference to that movie.
Time sure flies. It's already past 12.
A few days after the album release, they announced a 27-date tour for the album featuring the movie experience Chapter 2, which was going to be the best production they had ever had up to that point and would feature the continuation of Naomi's story. I actually wonder if they have even more of an advantage with Mark staying home in Montreal, since he's the one who's always been in charge of the live aspects of the project. Without the time and energy burden of touring, he's probably able to pour a lot more into the live shows than he would normally be able to, so that might actually be to their benefit. But anyways, the tour wrapped up in San Francisco in June, and then they started to make somewhat cryptic posts on social media referencing anime, which was an indicator of their anime show that would debut later on, but we'll get to that in a bit. That summer, they had a busy festival season, playing Bonnaroo for the first time, followed by Veld Music Festival in Toronto, which Deadmau5 is a part owner of, and be sure to check out my Deadmau5 video if you want to learn more about that. They then went on to play Ill Sonic, Dance Festopia, Lost Lands, and EDC Orlando. They also played their movie experience Part 2 for the last time ever that fall in Vancouver for Stacked. Later on in October, they posted some more pics on social media referencing anime, specifically a pic of one of the members wearing a Naruto Akatsuki cloak, but at this point, they still hadn't explained where this was all headed. However, that all changed when they played at Escape Halloween and opened up the set with a Naruto intro, which was a glimpse into the direction that they would be taking things moving forward. Not much later, they revealed that they would be playing Ultra the following year in 2023 with a brand new anime-themed visual experience called Portals, the name of their upcoming album that would also release the following year. Even though they released an album at the beginning of the year and had another one coming the next year, they also had a ton of other releases throughout the year, including the Prayers EP, the Frontman EP with ATLiens, plus Deathstalker with Yuki, and Out of My Head with Riot 10. To close out the final month of the year, they played a few random shows in places like Hawaii and DC, plus a New Year's Eve festival in Las Vegas called Jackpot. On New Year's Day in 2023, they played a set at Exchange LA, and 2 weeks later, they announced that their fourth album called Portals would release in October. Soon after, they announced that they would be playing at Red Rocks for the second time right before the album release, and that Mark would be returning just for that show so they could play as a trio one last time. After the announcement, they opened up for Excision at Thunderdome and then debuted their Portal show at Ultra in March. They then played more Portal shows sporadically over the following months leading up to Red Rocks, which would be the final Portal show of the year. One of those shows leading up to Red Rocks featured the debut of Skull Machine, which is the supergroup of BTSM and Kai Washi, who wears a skull mask specifically for those shows. A little later on in the year at Lost Lands, they debuted the BTSM anime show, which is the new direction they would be taking their live show after Red Rocks. And 1 month later, on October 22nd, their Portal show at Red Rocks finally took place with the return of Mark to reunite the trio for one night only. It was a very fitting show for his return, as the last time they played as a trio was also at Red Rocks 2 years prior. It was a very emotional night for them as they got to relive what once was for one last time. 5 days later, the Portals album was released and they had a few more shows to close out the year, ultimately finishing it off at Decadence, Arizona. Moving on into 2024, they have had a massive year so far, with huge events like back-to-back sold-out nights at the WAMU Theater featuring the anime show on the first night and Skull Machine on night 2. Minneapolis got the same 2-night treatment at the Armory a couple months later, and aside from that, they've played at some major festivals like Ultra and Forbidden Kingdom, and they also got to open for Excision at the Denver Coliseum. However, probably their biggest moment of the year, and perhaps one of the biggest moments of their career, came when they got to headline Electric Forest for the first time ever. They also got to play at Ultra Europe, and they were the next to last set at Perry's stage on the final day of Lollapalooza this year, which is a pretty big deal. Aside from that, they've released 2 singles this year, Zombie X O Fortuna and You Shall See, and they've also got some plans for later in the year, including a return to Lost Lands, of course. At this point, Black Tiger Sex Machine has been around for the last 15 years, and not many artists can make it that long, especially not while being at the top of their game. However, I think that there are a few things that we can point to in order to better understand how they've been able to make it work. For one, as I mentioned much earlier in the video, they are extremely organized, which has allowed them to divide responsibilities based on each member's personal strengths, creating the most efficient outcomes. Additionally, they have the business acumen necessary to push their art commercially, allowing them to grow the brand, create new opportunities, and of course, make a living. They had a plan from the very beginning and executed it well, and they're not afraid to adapt when necessary. We also can't overlook the fact that they built this thing from the ground up and were just a local act in Montreal for many, many years before their reach started to expand outside of their region. By taking this organic path and cutting their teeth in the early days, they had already experienced tremendous growth as artists before scaling things up, which made the transition to becoming a global act more seamless. With these valuable skills that they gained, they have been able to navigate the music industry without a manager, grow an international label, and help accelerate the growth of fellow artists. And possibly the most important part of all is that they fostered a sturdy local fan base for years, which gave them a strong foundation from which they could springboard to new heights later on, and they still foster their much bigger fan base in this same way to this day. Through fostering their local fan base early on, by the time that the project really started to accelerate, they already had hard proof that their success could be replicated on a larger scale, and they have indeed replicated their success time and time again throughout the years, and will continue to do so. If there's one thing that really stands out to me about Black Tiger Sex Machine, it's that they've got all their bases covered, and they really are a complete package as a trio, possibly being among the most efficient acts navigating the world of electronic music. First, they had a dream, and then they enacted a plan to make that dream a reality, and now, just look at what they have to show for it.